This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Tom Cruises Off a Cliff edition. It's Wednesday, July 19th, 2023. On today's show, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. It returns Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt. It's a wild romp that pits him against some mega AI. It co-stars Haley Atwell, Ving Rhames, all the gang's back. And then the band Wham! It was a duo, and they owned the 80s pop charts, especially in England, but kind of globally. A new documentary on Netflix retells their surprisingly moving and graceful story, in one man's opinion. And finally, Spill has been described as the 3-2-1. And finally, Spill has been described as the black alternative to Twitter. We will discuss. Joining me today is Nadira Goff, Slate culture writer. Hey, Nadira.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is will be our most extensive face-to-face interaction, and it's just great to be making a show with you.
Ditto.
Yeah, really nice. Thanks for coming on. And of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate. Hey, Dana.
Hello, good day.
Yeah. Oh.
We should mention in these, post-COVID, are we in a room together times, that we are all three sharing actual physical space. So I'm hoping that's going to give an extra frisson to the recording.
One can only hope.
Oh, the extra frisson. Okay, let's make a show. Co-writer and director Christopher McQuarrie has been credited with taking over and reviving the Mission Impossible franchise. He's really made it, you can't say his own, right? He has co-ownership with, of course, Tom Cruise. Both of them return with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. This one pits Cruise, who I think you probably know is some kind of special super-duper triple secret agent, Ethan Hunt, against something called the Entity, which is an AI that's gone rogue. That was his mission. He chose to accept it. It's to hunt down and kill a thing that is omniscient, omnipresent, and very rogue. This one co-stars Haley Atwell, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg. In the clip we're about to hear, there's a tense scene. Ethan Hunt, as played by Cruise, and Haley Atwell, who is Grace, are in a completely vertical train car. It's dangling over the side of a cliff. It's a bravura sequence, I think one has to admit, and a piano hangs precariously above them.
Grace, you have to let go. Grace, you gotta let me go. You gotta let me jump across, or we're gonna die. Do you trust me? You gotta trust me or not? You gotta trust me. Grace. Okay. Come on, Grace. Give me your hand. You gotta jump. Don't look up. Look at me. Look at me. Trust me. I won't let you fall. I promise. We're almost there. Come on. I won't let you fall. Jump, Grace. Jump. You gotta trust me. Jump, please.
Dana, let me start with you. If you and I are ever dangling by our fingernails in a vertically positioned train high above an abyss, don't trust me. Here's Cruise. He's in his early 60s. The hype around this movie involves one stunt in particular. We'll get to the stunt, I'm sure, but it's part of a larger, ethos/marketing scheme about the movie, which is that this is an ode to the analog world. And I kept thinking of Keaton while I watched it, and therefore you. So I'm very curious to know, did they revive this franchise in action movies? Is it on life support? I mean, one might go either way. Which way did you?
I mean, movies may be on life support, but the Mission Impossible franchise is doing pretty well. Like other Tom Cruise properties, not everyone. Of course, he's made some bombs as well. But look at Top Gun Maverick last year, a complete surprise, right? That was what brought people back to the box office. Not that it wasn't a good movie, but, it was exactly the sort of big, grand scale action blockbuster that had been getting hurled onto screens every weekend and half the time losing money, or if not more. And yet Tom Cruise is able to make it happen. And I think when it comes to the Mission Impossible franchise, and actually with Top Gun Maverick too, part of the reason is because of that dedication to practical stunts and, that kind of Keaton ethic of this is really happening. A real human body is risking his life in front of you. That last sequence that we mentioned, I don't want to spoil too much about it, but it is clearly a shout out to the general. I mean, I did not even have to shoehorn in my Buster Keaton reference in talking about that one.
All, no.
And a really clever riff on it. I think a really beautifully staged scene. Yeah, but there's like a lot to be said about Mission Impossible, and I don't quite get it myself. I understand that there's a great deal of love and affection for this franchise. And when you watch it in a theater full of people, the moments that it shouts back to sort of some of the classic Mission Impossible movie tropes, including the beloved mask reveal, where a character pulls off their own face to reveal a different cast member underneath. Obviously, one of the stunts that is not practical, right? Although in the early days, I bet there was some actual rubber masking. I'm sure all CGI now, but somehow those never fail to get a huge rise out of the audience. And it's very emblematic, I think, of the world that these Mission Impossible movies create. It's not superheroes, right? It's not exactly supernatural, but there's these sort of impossible moments of, super spydom, like those mask reveals. And once you're locked into the logic of that universe, it's kind of wonderful. And I have to say, I can completely understand somebody washing their hands of this whole franchise and saying, oh, it's all the same thing. But when you're in that theater watching it and you're actually hurtling off cliffs with Tom Cruise and watching people rip their faces off, it's pretty damn fun.
Right. Nadira, this movie's been marketed very heavily. It did well, but you wouldn't say that it crushed. And it's about to come face to face with Barbenheimer next weekend. So it's an okay hit. It has a sort of break-even vibe so far at the box office. Did you fence it? Are you going to urge people to go ahead and nudge it into the black? Or is it, what do you think of this film?
Great question, because there's a running joke that I have, which is that I'm someone who loves espionage. I claim that I love espionage, but I've never seen a single Mission Impossible film or Bond film before in my life. And so it's like, do I really love espionage? I know.
You've never seen a Bond
It's a conversation for another time. But what I will say is I actually do really love espionage. It's just I haven't gotten around to it. And so what I did was again, like I did for John Wick, watched a YouTube recap of 1 through 6 and then walked into the theater, sat down and watched this movie. And I have to say, I wrote down 3 words, again, espionage, trains, and friendship. All 3 things that I absolutely adore. I adore trains and friendship as well. And they're very present in this film. And so I had a great time. I do think I definitely had some sort of reservations or critiques that I could nitpick. But overall, I think the set pieces were amazing. Tom Cruise, as much as I find him to be a sort of polarizing public figure, I think his action hero prowess is just sort of unparalleled. You can tell that he does all of his own stunts, all of the things that everyone has been saying about him for years. And in a movie like this, which is paying homage to Buster Keaton and to analog visual effects and stunts, it's just very apparent. When you have a movie where there's a literal piano about to fall on your heroes, it's like, sign me up, those are the kind of callbacks that I really want to see. And I think it also is very wink-winky in other ways. It involves a lot of sleight of hand, which I could watch for forever. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting camera work and a lot of very interesting angles going on. But yeah, for the most part, not having seen any of the previous films, I still really enjoyed it.
Right. Yeah. I saw it with an audience that was really primed for especially the tongue-in-cheek moments. And as for this franchise, I always felt as though, what did it really have? It had this kind of kitschy 60s TV show nostalgia behind it for the IP.
Wonderful musical theme.
And it had the Lalo Schifrin theme song.
Yeah.
You should build a whole movie around the moment when you finally unleash that theme in all its glory. And I always felt the movies fell short of the theme. This one came closest for me. I'm someone who's averse to Tom Cruise. I really don't like him or especially his body of work. I don't like his method of acting. He just has been a turnoff for me and it's my problem, not Tom's. I acknowledge that. We've tried to work it through, but it's not happening. But age has finally, the irony is that the selling point is he's ageless. And respect, right? Like, he obviously is a super physically fit guy in his early 60s. That's inspiring. But it's actually the fact that he's aged that humanized him for me a little bit in this movie. That's a human face now in a way that I think in some ways it hasn't been. I've always perceived it as an anti-human face. There's something quietly berserk going on behind those eyes that I find.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
It's like a fake interiority, and like it's most at home, you know, on the Stairmaster, you know what I mean? It's just got this kind of like, I work out really hard, and, you know, and it's just not, I can't get with it. But respect where respect is due. Like, Macquarie did come in and really revive this franchise quite a bit. He is a genius at creating individual action set pieces that have a kind of internal narrative coherence. We need to complete task X. And they're embedded within a larger whole, which is in order to complete mega task Y. And he just does that with a clarity and a cleanliness that a lot of directors, I mean, all due respect to the franchise for bringing in John Woo and De Palma, who did the first one, you know, interesting auteurs to attempt to make an interesting franchise. At the end of the day, that's the skill. And then internal to each of those set pieces, the choreography is really clean, really creative. You're not lost ever in Macquarie's action sequences. What I would say is, how could you identify a principle by which at one moment you're like, yeah, I'm with it, and then the next moment you're like, that's not real. It's all unreal. But for some reason, for me, I loved the set piece in Rome with Haley Atwell. Her character's marvelous. She's marvelous as the character.
I have some drawbacks on her character.
I want to hear it. I really want to hear those. But I thought she was quite charming.
She is great.
Enlivened the movie.
Yes.
And their relationship had some spark and juice to it, which is great. And then just to end up in a tiny, you know, by American standards, humiliatingly emasculating, you know, American male standards, emasculatingly small car, having to execute a chase while handcuffed awkwardly to one another.
A great example of how humor and action come together in this franchise.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Whereas the capital T, capital S, the stunt, I thought was unimpressive. I didn't think they got a cinematic boost from having Cruise instead of a stunt double do it, which I thought was odd. You know, there were shots I thought you would get if it's Tom Cruise on that motorcycle that they didn't seem to really get. I don't want to give anything away, but what it culminates in is so preposterous that I was like, how could I say that you lost me there after what you've done already? But it's fun. It made me like Cruise more than I have in a long time.
Okay, the thing about Grace, my girl, how many times does Tom Cruise have to jump in and save you before you realize you need to stop running away from him? I think was my biggest issue with her. I loved Atwell as this character, and I really loved Grace, but she ran away maybe one or two too many times for me to just think, you know, you're going to get yourself into trouble. He's going to find you. That's sort of the formula that we have going on here. If you just didn't run away, then maybe everything would be cool. And I do think that there are repercussions because of that specific choice in the film that I won't spoil. And I think those repercussions are good because it was getting to a point where I was like, okay, girl, I'm going to need you to stop disappearing. But for the most part, I really, really loved her. And I loved her because I think that this film is self-aware in a way that I really enjoy, right?
Me too.
It starts off with the Secretary of Defense or whatever this government official is saying basically, you know, I'm sorry, there's a different IMF and all they have to do is say, you know, they're accepting this mission and you leave word and someone interrupts and says, well, if they choose to accept it, you know, it's very self-aware about the sort of silliness that the movie implies. And then I think the Grace character comes in and sort of voices all of my frustrations. You know, there's one point where she just screams, is there anyone who isn't chasing us right now? And I'm like, yeah, those are the types of things that I'm thinking or that I would say in those moments. And so I do love the sort of self-aware moments that it has, but I also like that it doesn't take it too far where it's not still silly, because it is. And I want to show up to a movie like this that's still silly, for sure.
It definitely is that. Dana, I have to ask you about the kind of meta-narrative behind this film, which is that it's an ode to everything. It's right, old-fashioned movie star, theatrical distribution, but also movie making without CGI. There's plenty of CGI, presumably, in this film, but you know, it mostly is an homage to analog filmmaking and the analog world in general therefore the villain is AI. That seems to me very cleverly pieced together a sense of what this movie is about and for.
Yeah, that was so double-edged for me because the idea of having a thing called the entity that is essentially AI, an artificial intelligence threatening to take over the world, be your villain in the summer of 2023 is so prescient, even more so than Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise could have planned, right? And it was basically the same moment that the actors joined the writer's strike and that AI is becoming this huge villain in labor disputes that this movie comes out. And so all that is so perfect. And all of that makes me wish that the villain had been better developed and elaborated and that the conceptuality of the villain had just been taken a step further. I kept waiting for some sort of pseudoscientific exposition dumpy kind of scene of like tense people in a boardroom describing how this AI threat was going to work exactly or what its motivations were. And insofar as the AI is this faceless villain that doesn't have a body, it made it really hard to sort of know who they were running from.
That's
there is a man named Gabriel, a character who you might think of him as like the human representative for the AI. He's not supernatural again. He's just a guy who believes in AI, I guess. And he is the person running around fighting them on top of trains and throwing pianos at them or whatever. But you never understand what this character, this guy played by Isai Morales, who is, pretty threatening and like physically impressive, whatever. But what are his motivations? Why does he want AI to take over the world? Presumably, there must be other people in this universe that want it to take over the world. Is that a political movement? You know what I mean? There could be a whole, this could be embedded in a more political, socioeconomic sort of built world without having to turn into, some highbrow sci-fi. It just needs a little bit more development.
It made me want, Nadira, a little bit of the 70s auteur. I mean, this is my own hobby horse and no one has to ride it with me. But, had you made a version of this movie in the 70s, let's say, exactly what Dana said. There would have been a moment of utter queasiness when you realize this thing is omniscient. It practically has a precog sense of what's going to be next, which Minority Report, a cruise film, a blockbuster, action blockbuster, had some of that too. Like, this thing is coming and it's going to know more about you than you know about yourself. And this movie so takes place outside of anything like a recognizably real universe. It can't make that connection with an audience by saying like your home, your refrigerator is watching you. I agree with Dana. That's kind of missing a little bit from this picture.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think there are a few characters in the film that try to explain it multiple times, but it never really feels satisfactory enough. And yeah, I completely agree that this was a great opportunity to really go there. And it kind of just felt like, well, what even does the AI want to dominate what if there's nothing left? And, Gabriel, is he getting money? Or surely the AI will sell him out too at some point. So what is the point? And I kind of ended up feeling just as confused as you were, Dana, about the sort of motivations. But at the same time, every time they said the entity, I laughed. So it was mostly fine by me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to gesture at a can of worms and then leave it unopened. I don't think he really did the stunt. The movie is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And it's in theaters, and we had a nice time. Don't be a brick in the wall of Barbenheimer that hits this movie in the face next weekend at the box office. If you want, check it out. All right, let's move on.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. Welcome to the window of opportunity, when your next move can either make your business famous or obsolete. So you need to be ready. Be handling good surprises and bad ones ready. Be opening a Portland, Houston, and Providence location on the same day ready. Be stock options plus paid family leave ready. SAP has been there and can help you be ready for anything that happens next, because it will. Be ready with SAP. At the end of your first year, Discover credit cards automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right. Everything you've earned, doubled. All the cash back from eating at your favorite soup dumpling restaurant, doubled. All the cash back from that trip where you sort of learned to snowboard, also doubled. And the best part, you don't have to do anything ridiculous to get it. Nope, Discover does it automatically. Seriously, though, see terms and check it out for yourself at discover.com/match. We have a couple items of business this week. One is just a really quick note on the Summer Strut, which I mentioned last week, our upcoming episode about a listener-compiled playlist. Unfortunately, we are full up on songs for the 2023 Summer Strut. If we put one more on the list, we will not have time to listen to them all before we talk about them. So if you've sent us something since July 1st, we weren't able to put it on the list, but please save it for next year's list. Our other item of business is just to tell you about today's Slate Plus segment. This week, Steve, Nadira, and I will be talking about a piece in The Atlantic called How Handwriting Lost Its Personality. It's about the state of handwriting in the digital age, whether we write things down anymore, whether we know each other's handwriting and signatures, what writing means and how it is different from digital typing. I'm excited to talk about that because I think all three of us probably have some stories about handwriting and its loss or gain. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that at the end of our show. And if you're not, you can become one by signing up for Slate Plus. When you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear members-only programming like the segment I just described. You'll get ad-free podcasts. And of course, you'll get unlimited access to all of the great writing on our site. When you're a Slate Plus member, you're supporting us, our show, our magazine, and the work of all our colleagues. So please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus. Okay, Steve, back to the show.
Wham! ! It's a documentary about the pop duo of the same name from the 80s. It tells what turns out to be, I just can't help signaling my own feelings, I guess, a strangely moving and human story of two lads from the London suburbs, both children of immigrants, who meet, bond over music, and start a band. One of whom happens to be George Michael, sort of. He's actually not yet George Michael, which turns out to be a huge part of the story. As a child of Greek immigrants, he still goes by Yog. And what we get is an iconic story that very quickly reveals itself to be a very bittersweet and human one about the perils of fame, especially as it relates to being in the closet. In the clip we're about to hear, the duo discusses the critical reception of their music once their first studio album started to dominate the UK charts. Let's have a listen.
However, the music press didn't like Club Tropicana at all. They resented that we had thrown the shackles off. It wasn't another protest song.
I wasn't too keen on the Casablanca single, whatever it was called, but...
Club Tropicana.
That's right, yes, I knew it was one of those places.
Withering, contemptuous, complete sellout.
When your first couple of singles came out, you had quite a mixed following. Say that you seem to have now, like, what we've got around here, which is like a lot of young girls madly in love with you. Is it a change of image? Because it looks that way to me.
We started off with mainly a club audience, a lot of girls and blokes of our own age.
Yeah.
And this year we've been in a lot of national press and we've been in a lot of girl magazines and things like that.
So that's a choice of your own, though.
Yeah, it's a choice of our own.
It knocked George because people weren't taking him seriously as a songwriter.
Nadira, let me start with you. I'm very curious to know what your relationship to this music was, if anything at all. The documentary, I think, is bound to hit one at a particular angle based on one's perception of George Michael going in. Let's start where the clip starts in some sense. They began making socially conscious rap songs about being underemployed in Thatcher's England. They very quickly pivoted and turned into the pop duo that we know them for now, and the resentment in the rock press and on and on and on. Did you learn a lot about their story that you didn't know? Did you know anything going in? Did you have any kind of relationship to their music? And what did you make of the documentary as a consequence?
Yeah, I love George Michael. I think that I've loved George Michael for quite a bit of time. I'm a big fan of the sort of Hall & Oates school of blue-eyed soul, you know?
Yeah.
And so I've definitely been familiar with George Michael. I was less so familiar with Wham. Obviously, I had heard, and I do really enjoy the hits, Last Christmas, Wake Me Up Before You Go, all of those songs I've definitely heard and enjoyed. But I was 100% more familiar with the idea and legacy of George Michael as a solo act. And so I feel like I definitely learned a lot from this documentary, but I still was a little skeptical about it or had some questions in the sense that, first of all, I would have liked a little bit more clarity about where the pieces of George's audio were coming from. Mm-hmm. He died in 2016. And I know that they use actual archival audio that he himself has said that it wasn't a Bourdain Roadrunner situation of, you know, sort of AI Frankensteining his voice to say certain things. But I would have liked to know, maybe shown a little bit of the clips where some of the audio segments had come from. I thought that would have been interesting. And then I was sort of confused. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a documentary that's not really interested in their music, I don't feel. It's more interested in their story and how they got together. But I was really looking for I picked up the guitar when I was 5 years old, and this is how I learned to love music or whatever. And it kind of has a weird trajectory where the documentary is trying to figure out what it wants to do with Andrew, or what's the statement that it wants to say about Andrew. And so it sort of paints this trajectory of their rise and then sort of cuts back to their earlier days in the middle. And I just found that to be confusing. I wasn't necessarily sure what the goal of the documentary was, because it was kind of clear very early that it wasn't to paint a sort of picture about their music and the socio-political climate that it was nested in.
No,
and
not at all.
there are barely any other artists at the time mentioned either. So it wasn't even, a story of we were competing against this band for the charts that much. Occasionally you got that a little bit, but it wasn't anything like some other music documentaries of the recent past or of the past. And so I was a little bit confused about what the actual aim of the documentary was. But at the end of the day, I love anything that has archival footage. And this has tons. And I think the way that they sourced it was really interesting. They apparently put out a public call to see if any fans or other music, aficionados had any archival footage. And they sort of sourced it that way in addition to what they had and what they could find. And so I think it's a really interesting project, but I wasn't fully sold on the idea or the point or the execution of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, we should clarify that Andrew is Andrew Ridgeley, who's the other member of the duo with George Michael. Dana, Nadira brings up a really good point, which is that you hear George Michael's voice quite a bit in voiceover throughout the documentary. Clearly, it's a later interview because he's out in it, and he wasn't out when he was in Wham, which is one subject of the documentary. Much of it is very frank, what he says about the loneliness and the struggle of becoming famous that young, that fast. What'd you make of this?
I mean, I think I have to say, I don't think that this documentary really succeeded on any level, except that, as Nadira says, it showed us some really cool old footage of Wham. Yeah. Like, if you want to just get a sense of, the fashions and the colors and the style of music videos in the early 80s, the sort of look and feel of the time, it gives you that. But it's so context-free. It's really quite, you're right, it's not quite clear what point of view we're looking at this from. It's more the story of their friendship, right? I mean, it talks about the two of them becoming friends, I think, in middle school when they were 11 and 12 years old. And really, in a way, how it was their friendship that kept them together during this intense 3-year period of fame. So it's a sort of sweet portrait of their friendship. But there's so much that it leaves out that I ended up feeling that it was just almost a first draft or something like that. And it really surprised me to see that the director of this documentary is Chris Smith, who made one of my favorite documentaries of the millennium so far, which was American Movie. Remember the movie about the two friends making a movie together? Coven, the horror movie. Oh my God. So unforgettable. He's done a lot of stuff since then. He made one of the documentaries about the Fire Festival. I believe it was the better of the two. He made Tiger King, which I didn't watch, but he's become sort of a TV documentary guy, right? But obviously he knows what it is to put together a really formally innovative documentary, because he did it with American Movie. And this feels a little bit like the opposite. Like, why didn't you go down this road? Why didn't you go down that road? And I think my biggest critique probably is that it ends so abruptly with the end of Wham itself, right, in 1986. Basically, their fame lasted for this really intense 3-year period, 83 to 86. Then they broke up amicably. And then there's just literally a picture of George Michael, the fact that he died in 2016, nothing about the vast career he had as a solo artist in between, not even the album Faith, which came out the year after this ends. It just seems strange to not even gesture toward why we're talking about Wham, which is in part that they led to this solo career of this very important artist.
There is an intertitle that says he went on to sell 120 million records as a
I guess so,
artist,
but I felt like it really rushed through all of that.
It falls to me to defend this documentary, which I love. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was absolutely about something. I thought it was about two things. First of all, I thought it was very much about relationship of these two young boys who meet each other by almost total kismet. That to me alone is an extraordinary story. It's like Keith Richards and Mick Jagger encountering each other on that train platform, or how do Paul McCartney and John Lennon grow up in the same school, and go to the same grammar school, and like these galvanic partnerships that might not have happened, and theirs came very close to not happening. And the fact that Andrew Ridgeley, I mean, this to me was fascinating about this documentary. Wham was a duo with one suave, supremely beautiful, musically talented young man in it named Andrew Ridgeley, right? And everyone thinks that sentence is going to be completed with named George Michael. And in fact, the documentary is very frank about how it was Ridgeley who was the genius behind the band in some sense and supplied it with its confidence and its verve at first. And that's a really human story, that Yog, George, was actually a very awkward kid at school, a bit of an outcast and supremely closeted. And Andrew taught him how to be comfortable with himself physically, musically, and as a performer. And then George Michael surpasses him in fame. And then Ridgeley, according to the telling of this documentary, but clearly 3-2-1, but clearly borne out by a lot of the audio recorded at some point by George Michael, Ridgeley was nothing but gracious about it. He personified human grace and generosity. That at every turn in the story, his love for his friend and his own lack of any need to service his own narcissism totally conquered any sense of envy or belittlement at George Michael's fame. And I actually believe that, given his presence,
so do I.
The sheer quantity of testimony from George Michael himself, and the archival film where interviewers are passive-aggressively needling Ridgeley for having become this kind of, the also-ran of the group, and he doesn't take the bait. And then what the movie really is about is the growing sense of loneliness and isolation of George Michael, who inhabits a heteronormative, I mean, looking back on it, it seems laughable, right? It doesn't feel like that at all from the perspective of 2023. But they were selling records to girls who were in love with George Michael, and he played up to it in a way that only made him more miserable and more lonely. And so to me, it's a very human story about what happened to him over the course of those 3 years and what happened to that friendship. And 3-2-1. And for me, that was just powerfully affecting. I mean, I was exactly the rock snob whose musical tastes were formed in 1977, right? And so I hated them.
Yeah.
And so it's just this magnificent rebuke to like my formative musical tastes in some sense and worldview. And to me, it was just it was very moving as the story of a certain kind of adolescent and pre-adolescent male friendship.
But Steve, precisely because the story of George Michael's many years in the closet and how miserable he was and how important it was for him to have an ally in his straight friend who knew he was gay and was fine with it, right? And was sort of protecting him in a way from that onslaught. Because that story is so moving, it just seemed like the documentary owed it to us to talk a little bit about the many years when George Michael was out, and what that meant. The fact that he, at some point during his solo career became a known gay artist. I don't know. To me, that just seemed like a last chapter that belonged in the story.
I think it's just hard because we no longer have George, right? So it's hard to have the preamble, and then it's even harder to have a sort of exclamation, I guess, about what happened after and what that meant without George actually there. And so the sort of like trying to thread the needle between the two, I found to be kind of confusing. I think the documentary is most successful when it, in my opinion, does what it was sort of set out to do, or I guess what I perceive it being set out to do, which is to answer the question that they keep bringing up in the film that annoying press are asking Andrew, like, what do you do? Mm-hmm. What was your role in this duo? Right. And I think that the documentary is very successful when it's answering that specific question, but kind of falters or fails in other places, or leaves me wanting more in other places, I should say.
Fair enough. The one thing I would say, Dana, about the absence of George Michael's solo career is you don't have him, and you probably don't have the rights to the music. They probably secured music rights through Andrew Ridgeley, who now controls them, I would imagine, now that George is gone. I think absent the music, maybe they made a choice to end it. And I thought that, too, had a kind of grace to it. This is the story of those 3 intense years. I just think there's something about being that young, that tender, that fragile, 19 and 20 years old, and then having a 3-year whirlwind happen to you almost out of nowhere remains a kind of powerful narrative arc.
Steve, I completely agree. I'm also someone who's definitely a sucker for an underdog story or any sort of my life changed overnight story. I just wish that they maybe told it a little bit better.
Fair enough. It's called Wham. It's on Netflix. I loved it. These guys were like very meh. It was mid, beyond
If nothing
mid.
else, it's, pleated pants and unbelievable colors and
Yeah.
very catchy pop tunes.
Yeah. All right. Check it out. It's on Netflix. Moving on.
I know what's ahead. I could feel the future.
From a producer of Top Gun Maverick and based on the award-winning novels by Isaac Asimov comes the next Apple TV Plus streaming event.
Empire and our foundation headed for war.
This could change everything. The Foundation is a threat to my empire. We will destroy them. We are taking the planet!
Foundation, the new season, streaming July 14th, only on Apple TV Plus. In theaters July 28th.
Welcome to the Haunted Mansion.
You ready to have your mind blown?
We have 999 happy haunts, but there's room for more.
We could be trapped here for eternity.
There's no turning back now.
Madam Leota, we need your help.
I can show you, but it will cost you $3.
What? It's highway robbery.
Who said that?
Disney's Haunted Mansion, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Only in theaters July 28th. Get tickets now.
All right. Well, as of right now, no doubt aided by its invite-only status, Spill is a very black space. So writes Nadira Goff in Slate. Nadira, that's a great piece you wrote. It's called My Week on Spill, the invite-only app, hoping to be the new Black Twitter. You go on to say, the vibe is like a private hangout for Black Twitter transplants. There are the jokes and memes, but with less news, fewer opportunities to casually scroll past racism. At the moment, Spill, being predominantly Black, feels freeing. Talk about what Spill is, who started it, why it feels different, and what you think its prospects are.
Sure. So Spill, as of right now, is sort of taking place as an alternative to Black Twitter. It was founded by two former Black Twitter employees, Alfonso Fons Terrell and Davaris Brown. And they created this platform that, by their words or their estimation, is supposed to center marginalized voices. It's supposed to center Black women specifically and queer people, and specifically Black queer people, I believe. And that doesn't mean that it's not open for everyone. Eventually, when it does exit out of its beta status, which we can talk about, it will be for everyone. Everyone will have a chance to log on. But for right now, because it is invite only, and it's also Apple only, which I think is a sort of downside generally, but they say that they're working on a Droid version for people who don't have Apple phones or operate iOS. But yeah, because it's right now in its beta status and it's an invite only sort of place, it is very Black. It's a very Black space. I think a lot of Black people got those codes and gave them to their Black friends. And now it's this sort of really nice hangout spot for people who are, legacy members of Black Twitter or are part of Black Twitter or want something to replace Black Twitter and want a safer, healthier, happier space to go to. But I have a lot of reservations. As much as I love it, I think Spill is great. I think it's really fun. But I have a lot of reservations about its longevity and about, if it is long lasting, how the app might stay the same or change.
Talk maybe a little bit more about those reservations, what those are.
Yeah, so I think my biggest one, because it's the question that everyone's asking, is will this be a successful replacement for Twitter or Black Twitter? And the thing that I say in the piece, and something that I've also mentioned on ICYMI for any of the listeners here who also listen to ICYMI, is that I find it really hard to imagine that this app will be a replacement for Black Twitter, simply because I find it really hard to imagine that a visual-based app will be an apt replacement for a textual-based one. Mm-hmm. And so the way Spill works is you have an image card, but it can actually be a GIF or a video or an image. And it overlays big, bold, graphic text on top of an image, right? And because it's this text on top of an image, that text can only be 90 characters long. And your comments can also only be 90 characters long.
Tinier than old Twitter.
It really is. So the point is to be quippy, to be effective, to be to the point, and ideally to be funny or impactful in that short span of time. But what you're then losing is complex discourse, which is a good thing and a bad thing. What you're losing are jokes that maybe are a little bit longer, but are worth it. What you're losing is a lot of extra context to things. And so it's hard for me to imagine that the app as it exists now could actually be a really apt replacement for Twitter, because Twitter just lets you do so much more. You can still have the videos and the text, but it's longer and it gives you more space to have, you know, a sort of entire rant about complex sociopolitical theory, or to talk about news, or to make a really long joke about the latest celebrity drama, right? And so without that sort of space, I don't know if the relevancy and the context will stay on Spill the way that it currently exists on Twitter. And so I think that's my biggest reservation. My other reservation is just a general one, and it would be the same reservation for any app, which is any app that has a specific user base that is a part of a specific demographic. As soon as it opens up to the rest of the world, how is it going to maintain itself as a healthy, safe space? And will it remain a predominantly Black space? Maybe. If it does, will it have the sort of financial capital to be, you know, a long-standing space or app that is successful? And if it isn't primarily Black, if it does, you know, adopt so many users from all different demographics, then what does it lose by not being, or by no longer being, a predominantly Black space? And so these are all the questions that I have about it.
Yeah, it's the scalability problem that seems to be killing one social media site after another, because it's this paradox, right? I mean, you want your community to be moderated and sort of limited enough that it doesn't become this cesspool of hate speech, right? But you also want it to have enough outreach that it feels like a significant mass of users is listening to each other, you know? And it seems like every new app or platform that's created is struggling with that same thing. I mean, because it's invite only, I haven't been on it to see how it actually looks, but sort of from what I've looked, the images I've looked at and what I'm hearing you say, it seems almost like this is a very meme rich, like it's a meme generating kind of network, right? That is sort of what it's about, is putting images and text together in a way that's funny and novel and goes viral and people pass around. So it's like a place to go and play, you know, which is great. And that is definitely the part of Twitter that I miss, the kind of, you know, more playful social part of it. But you're right that it also does seem to limit the degree to which it could be something that's influential, you know, on that's new communities of users. Can you thread things together? Could you create a sort of argument thread, or
you can
a buckle up type thread on Spill?
You can. And the way it kind of works is like an Instagram carousel, you know, when people have Instagram posts where it's more than one image and you can like swipe in between them. So that's kind of how a thread on Spill would work, is it's a 90 character with an image for one card, and then you swipe, and another 90 characters, and then you swipe, and another 90 characters.
So it's like an Instagram story or something, right?
And so that's kind of how you could build a thread. And some ways that people have gotten around this since I've written that piece that I've noticed is, well, for the first part, you can post a link, right? So you can have a news headline that maybe you've gotten down to 90 characters if it was more than that, and you can post the link and that will work. Some people have also just resorted to screenshotting actual Twitter or screenshotting their notes app or something to actually have the image be the text without overlaying text on top of it. But at that point, you know, again, if you have to take extra steps to get a certain point across, then maybe your platform loses its sort of instantaneous, I can go there and I can say this and I can get my message out thing that Twitter has, right? But I also think that it's all sort of up in the air, because I think that Twitter's predicament right now is very perplexing. I mean, I think Elon Musk has basically done nothing helpful for it since he stepped in. And now there's a lot of criticism of the platform, from rate limits as the most recent outcry, but basically just instilling a pay for access tiered version of Twitter that didn't used to exist. Now it seems like you have to pay for everything if you want the same access to the app that you did before, whether it be a blue check mark, whether it be literally the amount of tweets you're able to see per day. And so a lot of people have looked for an alternative, right? But the thing about Twitter is, before Twitter existed, there wasn't anything like it. In Twitter succession, there's Mastodon, there's Blue Sky, there's Threads, there's Spill. And so it's really hard for me to see almost any of them winning out when it feels like the market is already saturated or oversaturated for, you know, Twitter replacements. And so, you know, it's a little confusing.
And you do kind of need, as with all of these sites, sadly, you do kind of need a single winner, right? Because you really do need, Dana, at the end of the day, these mammoth network effects for Twitter to be Twitter, Facebook to be Facebook. I haven't checked in with you in a long time since Musk took it over on your Twitter habits, have they changed? Are you still there?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to expand this conversation beyond Spill just because I didn't know about Spill until you wrote about it for Slate, but it happened to be that piece landed the week that Threads launched through Instagram, which I refused to join because it's like, it just sounds awful. It's a Zuckerberg property, and it just sounds like it's basically brands talking to brands, and it sounds incredibly depressing. But it was also the week that I finally got on Blue Sky, which is an invite-only, new.
Not on that one yet. Someone send me an invite if you have it.
Yeah, I mean, and to anybody out there who's saying like, well, I guess I'm not important enough to be invited, I think it really is at this point just they're having trouble scaling up because there's so many people that want one. So it is not at all kind of hierarchical, but I'm still waiting to get my invite codes, and I'll send you one, Nadira, when I get one. Anyway, I basically got on there just to hang out a shingle, to have a place to park my social media identity for the inevitable moment when Twitter just completely crumbles. And I mean, it's a big, complex answer, Steve, to your question, because I feel so much resentment and anger toward the company that is Twitter right now, just what it's done to its users, really. I mean, just so many people, journalists among them, really depend on Twitter as a professional space. I mean, this isn't the case with me, but plenty of people, get a lot of their work there or find collaborators and hawk their wares there in a way that's really necessary and important. And the fact that it was a place where anybody for free could conceivably go on and create with the platform what they wanted, for all of its, toxicity and all the things that we can and should complain about the way Twitter was pre-Musk, it was a place that you could try to form a professional identity and make connections and all of those things. And because of choices that Musk has made for no apparent reason, he's run the business into the ground and turned it into a horrible place to be. I mean, the racism and anti-Semitism and all of that stuff aside, it is just now not usable. Like the algorithm doesn't show you the people you're following, right? Anybody who's on there can tell that their reach is massively less. It used to be I'd throw up an article I wrote on Slate and I could kind of count on, okay, at least like a few dozen people are going to retweet this or see it, or, I can get some sense that there's some amplification of my voice, of my work on this platform. Now it just seems like it's almost being buried because I'm not a paying subscriber, whatever. And I'm not complaining on my behalf, but just it is infuriating what that company has done to the, millions and millions of people that were using it for many years, more or less successfully. That said, after getting on Blue Sky, within a couple days, I was sort of having fun posting. Again, it is a limited community. It seems like a lot of media people migrated there. Yeah. So a lot of my sort of, Twitter fam is there, but it feels much smaller and a little cozier, whatever. Anyway, within 2 days of me sort of experimenting with, hey, I think I'll try posting on this different and nicer site, there's suddenly a racism controversy that erupts on Blue Sky, which has to do essentially with the lack of moderation and the fact that nobody there thought of the very basic idea that when you're creating your handle, you should not be able to use racial slurs, right? So apparently you can't put the F word in your handle. They won't let you do that. But you can put the N word, no problem. And some user or a few users did that, created a big clamor. And I kind of decided, I'm going to back off on posting here until I sort of know what's going on with the moderation. So that's a long way of saying, like, I'm flailing when it comes to social media. Yeah. And I suppose I should be like Henry Thoreau and go live in a hut and not have it. But it just makes me angry as a journalist. Yeah. Like, I have a right to have a little place to post my dinky little movie reviews.
Those are the two choices? Like,
I know. It's really upsetting.
No, but when you complain about social media, that is often, especially on social media, how somebody will reply, oh, go touch some grass or whatever. I mean, the fact
true. That is a
like,
common retort online. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to apologize for the fact that I would like to have a reasonably safe space where I could know that people who choose to follow me can see the things that they chose to ask to see. It doesn't seem like too much to ask.
Well, I mean, it's just I eventually got off Twitter because I was bad at it in the sense that, well, that's humiliating in and of itself, but also brought my worst middle school self to surface. And I just couldn't do that anymore. But nonetheless, the Ukraine war breaks out, becomes a hot war, Putin invades. And the next thing you know, just through some mildly strategic clicking and Googling, you're suddenly following 25 people who are boots on the ground, Ukrainians, present at the scene of the conflict, reporting in insanely intelligent, informed, and very first-person ways. That's an incredible utility in the modern world. One almost wonders if Musk wasn't out to kill it. like to kill that public square. That's another discussion.
But it's a huge question why he's doing what he's doing. Because as it happens, it does feed into essentially the end of democracy, right? But I think it may be that he's just such a flailing idiot that he got there like Trump, he's like a useful idiot.
I would posit that's maybe the case. Obviously, everything that he's doing, he says, is in the effort to make money or to make Twitter profitable. But he's done nothing but make everyone upset. And so I don't think it's necessarily working out for him.
The company's lost tons of value.
Tons of money.
And his money,
yes,
right?
I mean, he overbought Twitter anywhere. He bought it for too much money, for more money than it was worth anyway. And he was trying to get out of that. And so, that's a whole other conversation. But I think what's interesting and what's something to look at for the future is the thing that makes me the most upset or worried about where our social media dominant platforms are headed or going is that it seems like every single one of these apps that we have as a Twitter replacement has already made some basic mistakes in that way, or is set up in a way that I'm not sure will succeed, right? So that's Spill's case. But like you were saying, Blue Sky with the lack of content moderation in your usernames, which is very basic, or Threads, which when you sign up, which I am signed up, already has you following or seeing threads from people you don't follow, right? And so there's not a separate window for you to just see the people you want to see, the people that you follow, right? And this is a common complaint that has been launched at so many social media apps for so long. And so it's really, and again, I'm not on Mastodon, but that's because I find it very hard to use. And so it's really upsetting or frustrating, I guess is a better word, that all of these social media platforms seem to still have so much to figure out when it feels like we should be a lot further along than we are.
Beautifully said. I mean, it's an ode to engineers, right? Like this invisible labor that goes into making something usable and, this mostly invisible army of people who make something user-friendly that's actually technically quite complex to do. And that's all, if they do it right, that's hidden from you. Yeah. Anyway, this is one of those conversations we just return to over and over and over again. Social media is with us now permanently, so we'll come back to it. All right, well, the piece is my week on Spill, the invite-only app, hoping to be the new Black Twitter. It's by, of course, Nadira Goff. Nadira, great piece, and so psyched to have you here to talk about it. All right, let's move on.
Hey everyone, I'm filmmaker Charles Hood.
And I'm entertainment journalist Drew Taylor. And together, we're the superfans behind Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast.
Join us every Tuesday for a deep dive into the history of the films, exclusive interviews with top talent from the franchise, and more.
If you're looking for the biggest stunts and the biggest stars, you'll get that all in this podcast.
Listen to Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, now playing exclusively in theaters, and of course, stream the Mission Impossible movies on Paramount Plus.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana. What do you bring us today?
Steve, I'm going to do the incredibly superfluous thing of doing some free marketing for Barbie as if it needed it. I'm sure that next week we will be talking about Barbie, which opens this weekend. But I wanted to endorse this week the song that Billie Eilish wrote for Barbie, which she just dropped the video for last week. It's called What Was I Made For? Nadira's nodding over there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm already on record as an Eilish fan on this show. I think I was the first person who mentioned her back when she was a YouTube artist. I feel like I discovered her because I came in saying, have you guys heard of this teenager who makes YouTube videos? And literally a month after that, she was a superstar. Anyway, she has written, the end of movie theme song for Barbie. It also plays an important part in the movie in a brief montage near the end. But just the freestanding song and the video that she made for it, which she directed herself, are exquisite. Yeah. They're so, so beautiful. And she does such a wonderful thing with the melancholy of the idea of a doll. It's essentially a song from the point of view of a doll. And the video, which has this gorgeous kind of old-fashioned retro styling of her as a Barbie-style figure making doll clothes, is just such a lovely commentary on a lot of what I think the Barbie movie is trying to do, which we'll get into next week, which is to, at once be sort of popping with color and beautiful and retro and nostalgic, but also kind of asking this melancholy question, what is it to be made for, the male gaze in the way that a Barbie doll is? Or is a Barbie doll made for the male gaze?
And if I'm not mistaken, very quickly, I'm almost positive that the clothes that she sort of makes or uses in the video are miniature recreations of clothing that she has actually worn on red carpets and at events and stuff.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. I did not know that. And I wish that my Billie Eilish fashion knowledge was up to the point of knowing that. But something I've always loved about Billie's persona, too, is that, although she is very conventionally gorgeous woman, right, that she, for a long time, had this kind of anti-style, right? Wearing the huge baggy clothes and the neon green hair roots and all that. I mean, she looked great, but it was not your typical sort of starlet look. So I feel like the What Was I Made For, in addition to being quite smart about Barbie, it's quite smart about Billie and her own career, and it's just a beautiful, catchy song. So listen to the song and watch the video before you go see the movie.
I'm so with you on Billie Eilish. And furthermore, I'll never forget watching that episode of Swarm and saying, who is that actress?
So
She's doing an amazing job playing an oblivious rich white chick. And I was like, holy shit.
She's
like,
astonishingly good in that episode of that show.
Amazing.
I think it's a matter of time till, like Gaga, she makes the jump and starts really acting.
It's a note perfect performance of a social type that she isn't, right? And it's like, I want to see her in a lot more stuff now. I'm glad you felt the same way. Nadira, what do you have?
So I have 2 endorsements, which I know you're never supposed to do, but forgive me. My very, very first one is very quick, relation to the Wham documentary. At the 2017 Grammys, it's a moment that I will maybe never forget. They were doing the tribute to George Michael, and Adele performed. And Adele performed a tribute to George Michael. And the thing that I'll never forget is that Adele actually messes up the beginning. It's Too Fast Love. And she starts over. She apologizes to everyone. She curses. She says, I can't mess this up, because she's very emotional. And it's very clear that George Michael was one of her absolute heroes. And, she just says, I can't mess this up for him. I can't do that. And so she starts over. And it's this beautiful rendition of Fast Love, one that I wouldn't have expected to ever enjoy, because Adele is a very slow, sort of somber singer. And George Michael is not that. And so I was very perplexed about what it could be, but when she restarted, and it was still pitchy and it was still imperfect, but it was really beautiful because of that, I think. And it's rare that we ever get to see Adele be flawed, but she was so emotional, and George Michael in that song meant so much to her that even though her second go around wasn't perfect, it was almost even better. And so I would definitely recommend Adele's tribute to George Michael of singing the song Fast Love at the 2017 Grammys, because it's amazing. My other music endorsement, which I think is maybe the total opposite end of Dana's music endorsement in terms of pop music, is the K-pop girl group NewJeans. So I am a huge fan of the K-pop girl group NewJeans. They do a sort of Y2K-esque visual performance, and their songs have some traditional pop elements, but also some hip-hop elements, everything that's in right now. And they're sort of a shape-shifting girl group in the sense that they use so many different aesthetics to bring out, their vibe, or to evoke some sort of sense of nostalgia. And because of that, they've had an astronomical rise. They debuted just about a year or less than a year ago, and they are already one of the reigning K-pop girl groups that are out right now. And this is, in the world of Blackpink, which has just taken over the world. And so everyone's been trying to figure out, what is it about their creative direction? What is it about them that has everyone just in a frenzy? And I think you could write maybe an entire PhD dissertation with the answer to that question. But the one thing I can say is that if you're into sort of high octane, bubbly, very synth heavy Y2K pop music, then you will love NewJeans. They are so fun. They are so delightful, and they're just very cool. Their choreography, as with most K-pop groups, is absolutely insane, but it's also very accessible, which I think is something that they do really well. And I'm just a NewJeans stan. I am. And so anyone who's into K-pop, or who's into very sort of bubbly pop as opposed to Billie Eilish's melancholy pop, I would say definitely check out NewJeans. They have a new song called Super Shy, and it's already taken the world by storm.
I mean, I can't help pointing out, like, that is the genetic mutation that happens in the early 80s with Wham.
It's true.
Right? Like, and this leads into my endorsement, which is, I really mean it. Like, my musical taste got formed between 1976 and 1980. It was very much like, early period Bruce and CBGB's, all the CBGB's bands, and English punk, the heyday of English punk. And so when something like Wham broke, first of all, it played on all of my own, like, sexual insecurity and, frankly, homophobia as a young kid, you know, and aversion to music that it was highly gendered, like music that seemed apparently aimed at young girls, right, and not boys. And rock snobs are boys, and like that part of that documentary, the rock snob press, like going after them savagely. Yeah. And you're like, you know what? History is no longer on your side. Like it's no longer on my 7th, 8th, 9th grade year old side, nor is it on the side of those, you know, editors of New Music Express and whatever they're called. And anyway, all of which is to say, I will never forget where I was when I finally realized George Michael was a genius. It was the early 90s. And I was going out with someone who lived in a house owned by a very well-to-do person. And it was like one of those supremely alienating moments where I can't remember where everyone had gone, but it's like one of these really sterile houses right on the edge of a golf course. And it just has that like soulful soullessness that sometimes hits you and you feel like I'm having an epiphanic moment. And someone had left a mixtape on and the George Michael song Waiting for That Day came on. And that's the one, if you don't know it, it's the one that starts with basically a riff sort of taken from You Can't Always Get What You Want, the Stones song. And it's from the album Listen Without Prejudice, Volume 1. And that was the moment where I got, this guy is singing from some place really real, whose origins clearly to me were the closet and maybe, as this documentary elucidates, becoming one thing, becoming famous for the person that you're actually not, right? And being imprisoned in that. And I think that was a real coming out album or part of the coming out era for George Michael. It's an incredibly affecting song that ends with him singing You Can't Always Get What You Want. And it's like, no, this music is about the way disco was in some sense, right? Like very much a music of the closet. Like it's about loss. It's about a sadness that you can't say out loud in some sense. And I just think I do think that is an amazing song. It goes into heavy rotation on my favorite playlist. So check it out if you've never really grokked George Michael's solo career for whatever reason. Like I just find that song, that was my entry point for understanding how cool he was. Nadira, this is so fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know,
I had a great
really
time.
joyful. And like we have to do it again. I really actually want to do a full segment on NewJeans after that.
Please. I would love to.
Okay, that would be fun. And I definitely don't want to write a PhD thesis about it. But
I'll write the thesis and I'll do the podcast segment.
Fabulous. Okay, deal. So you're coming back soon. And Dana, as always, like really fun to do it face to face. It's just really fun.
Oh, yeah. It was a blast.
Cool. Yeah. All right. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by Nicholas Bertel. Our producer is Jessamine Molly. And a very special thank you to Merritt Jacobs, who's in studio manning the board for us. For Nadira Goff and Dana Stevens, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
Hey everyone, I'm filmmaker Charles Hood.
And I'm entertainment journalist Drew Taylor. And together, we're the superfans behind Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast.
Join us every Tuesday for a deep dive into the history of the films, exclusive interviews with top talent from the franchise, and more.
If you're looking for the biggest stunts and the biggest stars, you'll get that all in this podcast.
Listen to Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, now playing exclusively in theaters, and of course, stream the Mission Impossible movies on Paramount Plus.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Music. Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.